Welcome to ISAP, the International Forum for Sustainable Asia and the Pacific 2021, organized by IGES, Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. We are pleased to start a session at the landscape approach of biodiversity, climate change, and sustainable development co-benefits. I'm Yasuo Takahashi at IGES, and I moderate the session today. I'm joined by Professor Takeuchi, the president of IGES, via a recorded video. Mr. Amarzaman, a PhD candidate from the Center for Global Food and Resources, University of Adelaide. Dr. Rojo, a researcher at BICAM and assistant professor at the University of Leham, Argentina. Dr. Gupta, visiting research fellow at UNIAS, and Mr. Okuda, Director General of Nature Conservation Bureau of Ministry of Environment of Japan. Thank you all for giving us some of your time. The session will be 60 minutes long, and I hope you enjoy and actively participate. Now let's start the session. I'd like to invite our first speaker, Professor Takeuchi, via a recorded video.
Good day. My name is Takeuchi, President of the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, IGES, and visiting professor at the United Nations University Institute for the Advanced Study of Sustainability, UNIAS. I would like to welcome you all to this session on the landscape approach. As indicated by the overarching title of ISAP this year, and as discussed at COP26 last month, this is an important time to focus our attention on the climate and biodiversity nexus. I believe the landscape approach, which Satayama Initiative has been promoting worldwide for the past decade, should be at the heart of solutions to achieve biodiversity and climate co-benefits. The Satayama Initiative, proposed by the government of Japan and endorsed at the 10th Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity in 2010 in Japan, is a global effort to promote landscape and seascape approaches for biodiversity and human well-being. The initiative focuses its effort on socio-ecological production landscapes and seascapes, or SEPLUS, which are dynamic mosaics of land and sea use managed to maintain biodiversity while also producing commodities, considering their role in supporting biodiversity, often outside protected areas. SEPLUS can be a good example of other effective area-based conservation measures, or OECMs, to complement protected area networks. We're ahead of the Climate Convention's COP26, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, or EPBES, released an important workshop report on biodiversity and climate change jointly with the IPCC. The report expresses the interdependence between climate, biodiversity, and human life using a triangular diagram. Human life depends on and simultaneously impacts biodiversity. Biodiversity contributes to mitigating and adapting to climate change while also being impacted by climate change. It has become increasingly evident that human activity is both causing and being impacted by climate change. With this interdependence in mind, the workshop report emphasized the need for nature-based solutions, NBS, which generate co-benefits for climate, biodiversity, and human well-being. NBS entails a wide variety of actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural and modified ecosystems that address societal challenges, support human well-being, and benefit biodiversity. NBS highlights the importance of avoiding the loss of biodiversity and degradation of ecosystems, as well as restoring carbon and biodiversity-rich ecosystems, such as tropical forests and coral reefs. NBS may include actions on production landscapes and seascapes, such as regenerative agriculture. The EPBES IPCC report advocated a new conservation paradigm with multiple benefit interventions to focus conservation on multifunctional scapes, including landscapes, freshwater scapes, and seascapes. The scapes approach integrates functionally intact biodiversity with provisioning of material, non-material, and regulatory benefits from local to larger scales. It includes networks of protected areas and corridors, working or managed scapes, modified for human use, and transformed ecosystems such as urban and intensively farmed areas. The report states that for these approaches to be successful, sustainable, and rooted in the local context, any solution requires equitable planning and proactive participation of affected local communities in its design and implementation. Thus, local stakeholder participation matters. I'm sure you will recognize the similarities and synergies between this concept of scapes and the CEPRUS that we have been promoting through the Satoyama initiative. I think this demonstrates that our work is more relevant than ever in the context of both biodiversity conservation and tackling climate change. In the Biodiversity Convention context, we saw moderate progress toward Aichi Target 11 to protect 17% of terrestrial and inland water ecosystems and 10% of marine ecosystems. However, to address continuing global biodiversity loss, the proposed post-2020 global biodiversity framework intends to increase the goal to 30% for both terrestrial and marine ecosystems by 2030. This is called 30 by 30. But considering the practical limit to protection and the amount of the earth required to produce the food, materials, and the energy necessary to support the global population, we need to widen the concept of protection to include the spaces where people and nature interact. Here, CEPRUS can play an important role as potential OECMs with regard to the biodiversity climate nexus. The proposed new framework includes Target 8 on ecosystem-based approaches to climate action, to which CEPRUS also can contribute. Considering climate, biodiversity, and human health challenges, global attention to integrated approaches is increasing. A planetary health approach highlights mutual dependence between environmental and human health and advocates for the health of natural systems to reduce human disease risk. The One Health initiative and the working land conservation concept are examples of the planetary health approach. I will end my speech by repeating the 5 key concepts that I mentioned earlier and which I hope will be discussed in more depth throughout this session. These are integrated action to address the interrelated biodiversity, climate, and health challenges, nature-based solutions, CEPRUS as OECMs, the SCAPES approach, or multi-level and nested governance of social ecological systems, and local initiatives for achieving global goals. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Professor Takeuchi, for intuitive presentation. To complement Professor Takeuchi's speech, we posted the definition of key terms, OECM and NBS, in the chat box. Please see them if you're unclear about them. Now we move to case presentation from the project supported by the Satoyama Development Mechanism, or the SDM, a seed funding program to develop best practices from among the its members. For more details on the SDM, please check the website that you can access from the link posted to the chat box. Then I'd like to invite our second speaker, Mr. Amarzaman. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Hello, Hello, everyone. Again, a very good morning, good day, and good evening for all the participants of this session. It is really exciting for me to be here in this session. Thanks to IJES and the ICIP organizer this year for giving me the opportunity to share our works about supporting the adaptation in the upland of Indonesia for the benefits of local people and landscape. And this initiative was implemented by ICRAF Indonesia together with the Center for Global Food and Resources at the University of Adelaide. And some part of the activities were also funded by Satoyama Development Mechanism. We conducted our work in Pagar Alam, an upland region in South Sumatra province in the western part of Sumatra. So here is the island of Sumatra of Indonesia, and Pagar Alam is located in the southeast part of the island. The volcanic landscape is dominated by forest and coffee agroforestry area, represents about 2/3 of the whole Pagar Alam region. A significant portion of coffee agroforestry land in Pagar Alam is located in the forest frontier area in the border, which serves as the buffer for the protected forests. And coffee agroforestry also functions as the biodiversity corridor for wildlife. And a complex agroforestry system across Sumatra Island actually can provide similar ecosystem services to a secondary forest, so almost like a forest. And the landscape in Pagar Alam provides habitat for various species, including many endemic orchids, the IUCN Red-list Sumatran tiger, Sumatran cobra, hornbill, and macaca monkey, among others. And most of the farmers in Pagar Alam, even though it's a city, it's not a fully urban area. Most of the working population are farmers cultivating Robusta coffee. And Pagar Alam is located in the most upstream part of Musi watershed, one of the biggest watershed in Sumatra that provides various ecosystem functions to about 10 million residents of South Sumatra province. And according to Global Forest Watch in 2020, the landscape of Pagar Alam city contains about 17.2 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent. And let's go to the next slide. These are some of the environmental and livelihood issues in Pagar Alam. Within the last decade, the upland area faces land use change issues in which farmers gradually replace their coffee agroforestry land with vegetable crops. This land use conversion also prevalent in the sloping land and forest frontier. So what drove farmers to replace their coffee plots? First, vegetable crops provide higher income in daily or short-term basis compared to the perennial income from coffee. And second, there's no local market for better quality coffee bean that put better price for farmers' coffee yield. So most coffee farmers in Pagar Alam still practice traditional farming that produce low quality bean and resulted in the low farm gate price. Farmers have no incentive to improve their practices because they have to go extra miles for the management practices. And at the local level, there is no market for better quality bean. So if you produce low quality or better quality bean, then you will be priced the same by the local middleman. And looking at the situation, changing commodity from coffee to vegetable crops seems to be a rational solution for farmers to get a better income. And the other issue is related to the limited understanding on farmers' vulnerability in the marginalized upland area of Indonesia. Most farmers depend on natural resources that are slowly and surely affected by the changing climate pattern. And this is very prevalent in tropical country like Indonesia. Farmers' vulnerability potentially get worse and they may get trapped in pseudo adaptation by altering the landscape to the short-term more profitable land use, but in the long term, it will further deteriorate the environment. So it is important to understand farmers' vulnerability and adaptation process to help them in maintaining the landscape sustainability. In response to those issues, our project in Pagar Alam aims to understand the local vulnerability context of the farmers that might affect the sustainability of the landscape and help farmers to develop adaptation efforts that can address many issues that will negatively influence the sustainability. We carried out most of the activity in the forest border village, although we also had some activities at the Pagar Alam administrative level. We focused on the forest border village where the threats of land use conversion was high to assess the vulnerability. This project was implemented by ICRAF with the Center for Global Food and Resource at the University of Adelaide through Indo-Green Project, an action research project targeting several upland sites in Indonesia. But throughout the activities, we also collaborate with another development project called Empower. This is a farm improvement management project initiated by the private sector called Net Coffee. It's a Dutch-based coffee trader. Through the group discussions with farmers community, we identified some shocks and stressors that contribute to the local vulnerability. So the local community already felt changing climate pattern, but they also perceived that they are most vulnerable to price fluctuation, particularly during the peak coffee harvest period. In the local market, the bean price usually fell drastically during the peak harvest season, and farmers don't have options to sell their beans with lower price because they mostly depend on the local middlemen to buy their coffee. They don't have alternative market for their coffee commodity. From the assessment, we also get additional understanding that coffee farming was perceived as the local culture by the local community. So farming has been practiced since the colonization era, since the Dutch era in 1900. So it's been several generations in Pagar Alam has been practicing or cultivating coffee. However, now, more recently, seasonal crops provide an alternative for better source of livelihood. And the lack of income from coffee agroforestry actually contribute to the land use change that many farmers gradually replace their coffee plots with vegetables. And based on the understanding of the situation, we conclude that the adaptation process must be directed to improve the values or return the values of coffee agroforestry to the local farmers. So local farmers will be attracted to retain and improving their coffee agroforestry land instead of converting to other more intensive but less sustainable land use. And from the income perspective, vegetable crops indeed provide much higher income compared to coffee agroforestry with the traditional management practices, just like what the most farmers in Pagar Alam do. And we see here that the income from vegetable crops is about 8 to 9 times higher than coffee agroforestry. But in the other hand, coffee agroforestry actually has the highest return to capital compared to the other farming system, because cultivating coffee in the agroforestry system only requires lower investment than the other farming system. And we also see the potential with the improved management and better market price. Coffee farming can actually provide better income for the local farmers and more reason for farmers to maintain their coffee agroforestry land. So the adaptation practice should be directed towards this way. Towards re-promoting coffee agroforestry and make it more appealing for the local farmers. So as the first effort, we conducted a multi-stakeholder workshop on sustainable coffee. This workshop involved the representatives, gathered the representatives from different stakeholders, from the local coffee farmers, Pagar Alam city government, a representative from the national government that manage the forest area in Pagar Alam, and also the representative of the private sectors that is surveying the possibility for getting the beans from Pagar Alam. We also invited the head of Starbucks Farming Center in Indonesia to talk about the opportunity of sustainable coffee farming market in Pagar Alam. And the talk from the Starbucks Farming Center was used to as the stimulant of discussion, because we managed to gather different stakeholders on coffee farming in Pagar Alam, and as a result, the workshop produced 9 points of action plan to strengthen local coffee management and marketing in Pagar Alam. And after the workshop, as a follow-up action, we pilot an initiative to connect the local coffee farmers with a global coffee trader that is based in Lampung province, a neighbor province of South Sumatra. The company, Louis Dreyfus Company, is a global coffee trader, and they require some quality. They require their bean to meet some quality. So, as part of this cooperation, LDC provides some capacity building to the farmers' representative, which were from the cooperative in Pagar Alam, to ensure that the bean that will be sent under this cooperation will meet the quality requirement of LDC. And the cooperation with LDC as the coffee buyer provides farmers opportunity to access better market and improve their farming practice. And in the long term, this initiative is expected to keep rolling and increasing the spirit of farmers to retain and even improve their coffee agroforestry land. If we reflect on the nature-based solution that was used to support adaptation in Pagar Alam, coffee agroforestry actually represent an under-optimized nature-based solution. As a nature-based solution, it mediates conservation and production. It also provides a good example of sustainable management practice and an area with high ecosystem services, which is aligned with the Aichi Target 7 and Target 14. But there are some benefits that are not fully distributed or not fully shared. If you want to share the benefits of the nature-based solutions for all, we need to understand what are the multiple values of the NBS in the landscape where the NBS is applied. And to understand those values, at least we need to consider the ecological characteristics of the landscape and the people aspiration and values about the landscape and the arrangement of local institutions and the external factors that can be used to strengthen the landscape further. In our case, we found that the external opportunities to strengthen the nature-based solution, the coffee agroforestry, and share benefits to the local people is by connecting the local farmers in Pagar Alam with better coffee market outside of Pagar Alam. And that takes us to the importance of multi-scale collaboration. From the governance perspective, we all know that for a sustainable landscape management, it is really important to seek for broader network and collaboration with actors across scales that can support the landscape management at the sites. Our case study shows that there was a disconnection between local farmers in Pagar Alam with the growing sustainable coffee markets outside. The specialty coffee market is growing and more coffee consumption is increasing all over the world, but this not linked to the local farmers in Pagar Alam. The situation contributed to the limited values of coffee agroforestry to local farmers, and as a consequence, farmers gradually prefer more profitable land uses, which is very rational. And as the consequence in converting the land use, farmers also threatening the sustainability of their landscape. And in many cases, initiating collaboration for sustainable landscape management requires an intermediary actor, an honest broker or mediator. There are many terms for that role, but the actor or the intermediary should play the role to stimulate multi-scale governance and expand the networks that can help contributing to sustainable landscape management. And in Pagar Alam, our project took that intermediary role by providing evidence-based strategy for adaptation and mitigation, and facilitated local farmers to expand their networks, whether with the local actors in Pagar Alam City and outside of Pagar Alam City, to support farmers in retaining their nature-based solution through agroforestry. For developing sustainable adaptation and mitigation strategy, we need a more reflexive understanding on the multiple values of the landscape by looking at the diverse values that the landscape have from the multiple point of views, economic, socio-cultural, and ecological especially, and seek multiple pathways for opportunities and potential for adaptation. And adaptation also requires, most of the adaptation probably need some trigger through an external intermediary that can connect local actors with external networks and external opportunities, because sometimes the values are, sometimes the opportunities are undervalued internally within the landscape. But if we seek assistance or we seek opportunities towards the broader governance system, then we can see that the values are actually can be linked towards the a broader agenda of conservation and also development. And at this stage, ICRAF also has been continuing the activity this year by piloting the traceability project for local farmers to connect with the end users that appreciate sustainable processing of commodity. Again, thanks very much for this opportunity. I just want to acknowledge some colleagues that also being involved in the whole process of the work from ICRAF and GIFAR. I return the floor to Yasuo. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sacha, for excellent presentation. It's really inspiring. So then I'd like to invite our third speaker, Dr. Rojo from Argentina. The floor is yours.
Hello, good morning to you, good night to me. I will start sharing my screen now. There. Just tell me if you can see it. Great. Well, my name is Verónica Rojo from Argentina, from BICAM Research Group, and I will presenting our case study called South American camelids as biocultural components in the Andean Altiplano of Argentina. Well, the Puna or Altiplano is a region located in the Central Andes in South America. It's a high mountain plateau located at 3,500 meters above sea level. It has cold climates, strong solar radiation, low atmospheric humidity, and wide thermal amplitude. It extends over parts of Peru, Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. Here in Argentina, it extends over the northwestern parts of the country here. And it is especially associated with the high Andean ecoregion that has more altitude and more extreme environmental conditions. There are the two villages where we have been working, Santa Catalina and Barranca. Well, in Puna SEPL, the main rural livelihood is pastoralism of llamas and sheep, and they sustain in natural vegetation. So most of the vegetation communities are steppes, shrublands, and mainly grasslands, and when wetlands called bosquedales, or my internet connection is not stable. Just maybe if you cannot hear or see me, I will turn off my camera. Or vegas, the mountain wetlands in the Puna region. Well,
clear, it's okay. Please carry on.
Okay, thank you. The wet vicuñas can be integrated by chacus to the productive system as a highly valued source of fiber. Chacus are a traditional practice of capture, sharing, and releasing the vicuñas back to their habitats. So, multi-species pastoralism is especially suitable for facing the harsh conditions of the Puna region. Well, as I mentioned before, we work in the Puna, Argentina, in Santa Catalina and Barrancas rural areas. In these two villages, more than 40% of the inhabitants are considered poor in the national statistics. The long-lasting relationship between families and people can be observed by rock art, petroglyph, and other archaeological records since the people of America. Well, the main aims of our project were to co-produce with local communities an evidence-based resource management model of sustainable camelids model management for poverty reduction and the post-COVID recovery. We aim to investigate the impact of COVID-19 on the local bioeconomic situation in terms of key biological and social components of the Andean Altiplano SEPL, to clarify the necessary skills, cost, and time to weave vicuña garments from fiber obtained in local chacus in the area, and to enhance the understanding and awareness to the multiple values of the surrounding biocultural heritage sites and the pastoral ways of life especially among young people. Well, pastoral systems are important for biodiversity conservation and climate change issues, since the Puna shows a high level of endemism, and pastoral systems are adapted to cope with climate variation since its beginning. they have developed several strategies to cope with climate variation. In the Argentine-Andean region, climate change threatens biodiversity as it is expected to have an increase to the interannual variation of precipitations associated with reductions in the mountain rainfall and a warming of 1 degree. Well, some recommendations from our previous work in the area and our current project, include that it's important to diversify herds and maintain one whole sanitary management, as it has been mentioned in the previous presentation, to increase the relative number of camelids over total livestock. Like, as I mentioned before, livestock mainly are sheep and llamas. And camelids release almost half of the greenhouse gases than ruminants in relation to body size, and they are low impact grazers. To model adaptive animal stocks based on available forage in an intercultural dialogue, to dismiss the introduction of exotic forest species that are usually recommended in the area, and to dismiss the use of fire, both to increase the growth of vegetation and the control of predators from livestock. To carry out environmental impact assessments of activities such as mining, and to develop governance mechanisms in which local herders' ideas can be included in environmental policies regarding the maintenance of pastoral livelihoods. Well, some results of our work related to nature-based solution elements and co-benefits include the maintenance of adequate vegetation cover and richness, since the vegetation is the base of pastoral systems, to improve the resilience of the system to extreme weather events, to increase the relative numbers of camelids over total livestock. This is important, it's a nature-based important solution. And pastoral systems are one of the most adapted SEPs to climate fluctuations, as described before. So they are prone to achieve a better adaptation to climate change under certain thresholds. It's important to understand which are those thresholds and if they change among sites. Well, relating to multi-level governance and ecosystems connectivity, our work revealed that social and economic inequity between producers and consumers of camel goods is notable. Telecoupling is a common practice as camel fiber is processed in the global north. Most of the indigenous herders need to develop governance to enhance their capacities to intervene in decision-making relating local and provincial policies for selling the fiber and meat of domestic camelids. So national laws must take into account the inequities that communities face regarding the valuation of their products and livelihood. Inequity is also noted when the land use is a stake, especially related to mining interests in the region. It is very common that generally threaten pastoral lands. So for governing Puna SEPs effectively, efficiently, and equitably on a sustainable basis, several scales must be layered and integrated as pastoral or local scale, pastoral lands, provincial, national, and international, since international destinies are the most common destinies from the products generated in the area. Well, as final remarks, it's important to embrace diverse visions of good quality of life for all, to promote education and learning, especially through environmental education programs that we have developed them in our project. In our project, these are some pictures of the interaction between local schools and our research group and local ceremonies that are very important in the region. In the cosmovision, Andean cosmovision, they're very important and should be taken into account when education, learning, and research projects are developed. to reduce inequalities, especially as the fair trade that is really needed in the area, and to ensure responsible use of technology, innovation, and investment in the area, especially when the resources come from areas outside the pastoral lands. Well, I wanted to keep it very, very short, but there's more information here in our website. I would like to thank, well, most of my colleagues from BICAM, Viviana Vilá, Janina Arzamendi, and Jorge Baldo, and the organizers of this meeting, especially Koji, he has been very patient. And well, thank you all for listening. And if there's any question, we can see it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Veronica, for excellent presentation in the late evening in Argentina with very beautiful pictures. Thank you very much. So now we will move to a panel discussion building on the earlier three presentations. Dear panelists, please turn your PC camera on so that our audience can see all your faces. We invite our commentator, Dr. Gupta, for the discussion. So first, Dr. Gupta, please introduce yourself.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Yashua-san. I'm Hemant Gupta, visiting research fellow in the United Nations University Institute for the Advanced Study of Sustainability. And it was really good today to see these great presentations from Satayama Development Mechanism projects. And actually, today's session theme is of interest to me because I started working on climate and biodiversity linkages back in 2010. And since then to now, I have seen that there is an increasing recognition that biodiversity conservation is central to climate change mitigation and adaptation, besides contributing to the achievement of SDGs. So the world has now started to contemplate options that allow and assist nature to heal itself for sustenance of nature's benefits to the society. Land and water are important links between biodiversity and climate change, and effectively managed natural areas make us less vulnerable to the changing climate. Such management can also potentially reduce the risk and exposure to the communities. In turn, the communities nurture the ecosystems that they depend on. So the potential of communities in this regard has shifted the focus from just the protected areas to areas that are protected by the indigenous peoples and local communities. So this brings more focus to the other effective area-based conservation measures, which are capable of achieving the effective in situ conservation of biodiversity. In the context of socio-ecological production landscapes, the presentations today showed clear examples of in situ conservation through engagement of local communities and integrated action for addressing both biodiversity and climate change. There have been many trials and pilot experiments to mainstream biodiversity into the climate change regime through initiatives like REDD+ and ecosystem-based approaches. Now, nature-based solutions, as also discussed by Mr. Sacha, they are being viewed as yet another opportunity to synergize climate and biodiversity actions. However, the local initiatives focusing on sustainable utilization of resources following a SCAPE approach, the examples of which we saw today, will be key in defining what shape will nature-based solutions take in the future. In this background, I would also like to mention that the Satayama Initiative, the International Partnership for the Satayama Initiative, it presents a unique database of case studies from practitioners across various stakeholders. Those case studies actually reflect on the learnings from the real testing grounds, providing bottom-up guidance for upcoming solutions that focus on nature, IPLCs, and biodiversity. Such guidance is actually much needed today. Because if you just see the UNFCCC COP26 that concluded last month, was one of its kind in terms of its intent to include the IPLCs in climate change, adaptation, and mitigation, and also focusing on the role of the biodiversity. The UNFCCC COP decisions first started to take shape in COP6 regarding biodiversity through the Bonn agreements when forests were first recognized as important carbon sinks. But this time it was different. We moved beyond considering forests as just carbon sinks, but tried to recognize them for the value for biodiversity conservation, and especially on its integration into climate action planning at the national level. But many parties in the meeting, they were of the opinion that nature could not be 100% accepted as a solution to climate change because it is also a victim of climate change and it cannot be treated just as a recipient of carbon. So now I would like to narrow down my lens from the global perspective to the local action, or I must say narrowing down to the seeds of global transformation, the cases of which were presented by Mr. Sacha and Ms. Veronica from two different continents, but the same world, same challenges, and the same passion to achieve resilience. So it is clear from today's presentations that future solutions, including NBS, must focus on local initiatives and provide strength to the indigenous peoples and local communities. They should also prioritize local needs and traditional practices, besides minimizing governance challenges. Although there is a lot more to learn from the case studies, I'm just trying to make a gist by focusing on these things. We also need to work together in partnerships to conserve ecosystems outside the protected areas and to improve resilience to climatic changes. So with these remarks, I would actually like to kickstart a discussion by getting views of the case studies presenters on how the decisions taken under the multilateral environmental agreements shape local initiatives and do some specific decisions on the engagement of women, youth, and IPLCs incentivize action on the ground. Another question is, how did you manage to balance between global goals and local priorities when implementing action on the ground? As you showed that about the Aichi targets, about the upcoming targets, how could you actually balance between those global goals and your own local needs and priorities? Thank you very much. This is an open question to both, and it depends which one you want to answer or you want to answer both. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Himangana, for introduction and catching up with the global discussions on the climate change and biodiversity, and also with focus on how these kind of environmental discussions are dealing with indigenous peoples. And now, shall I directly move to the presenters to ask presenters to answer to your questions now? Himangana, you raised the three main questions, such as how the environmental agreements internationally can affect the local initiatives or incentivize the local actions, and the balance between the global goals and the local goals. So maybe can I request Sacha first to answer to this question?
Thank you, Yasuo and Himangana for the question. That is a very interesting question and also insights actually to be taught by all of us, because we've seen a lot of global agenda and global conservation target can become diluted and also being counterproductive towards climate and conservation objectives at the local level, even though the global agenda was already articulated well at the global level. So yeah, and we based on Pagar Alam cases, we also see that there was some previously some opportunities for certification, but there was some reluctance because most of the portion of the certification probably cannot be leaked or how you say it, multiplied to the farmers level, and mostly it's in the intermediary level. So we try to avoid that. We need to carefully articulate those global targets by really work at the local level and trying to address what are the local problems and see it from the local community lens when we're trying to define the solution about conservation, biodiversity conservation, or a climate adaptation and mitigation problem. We have to start from the local community first, and then we try to have a look on the umbrella agenda for the global, not the other way around. So previously it was, even though the participatory approach and the local community involvement principle was also being echoed in many global agendas, but at the implementation level, the process was usually end up as a top-down process. And now we have to think the other way around and start from the bottom, start from the local community first, addressing what are their values towards the landscape, the biodiversity. And from there, we can connect with the initiatives that are available out there, not the other way around. So that would be my comment, Yasuo and Himagana. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's very nice to see your efforts to kind of connect the global and the local efforts and how you have been struggling to connect these two. And Veronica, so could you answer to the question for Himagana now?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mangana. And well, I mostly agreed with Sasha has mentioned before. Usually the global agendas are top-down policies, and pastoral lands are usually compatible with biological conservation. And the problem is, the main issues are that sometimes other commercial interests are more important and more powerful than the pastoral lands and indigenous people. Like, for example, in Puna, in Argentina, the lithium interest, it's been a great pressure, and it's a problem because it demands so much water that it can be a problem for pastoral lands. And people, even if they are not quite agree with this change of land use, they have to do a conversion because there is a lack of work, and the conditions that they have to trade their products are very difficult. So it's most the problem there. I think that, well, as I said before, the pastoral lands are compatible with diversity. I mean, they can accomplish most of the global agendas relating to biodiversity conservation and climate change mitigation. But there are other interests that act inside the country and at diverse scales, from provincial, national. Since Argentina has a lot of pressure regarding minerals and other products, and that's the key issue there. There's a conflict there because pastoral lands can be compatible. They actually are their ancestrals dealing with conservation, biodiversity. Biodiversity is so important in cosmovision, Andean cosmovision, that, well, you can't think that apart from there. Those pastoral lands include biodiversity conservation, but there are other interests that are acting now, and they're very strong, and local people can do a same effort to fight against it. That I think that I don't know if I was clear enough.
Yeah, very
Thank
clear.
you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing the reality at the local level, particularly about dealing with the conflicting interests at the local level. And the lithium mining could be very kind of a difficult issue to deal with, which is also pointed in the IPCC's workshop report. In this way, the renewable energy development can harm biodiversity on the ground, like in Argentina. So, Himagana, do you have any reflections or additional questions to the two presenters?
No, I'm just very moved by listening to these on the ground this thing, and I hope that the global negotiators they become more sensitive to the needs of the local people and the indigenous practices as soon as possible before they are lost. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So maybe we can look at the keywords presented in the keynote presentation by the Professor Takeuchi to explore how our discussions address these points in the presentations. So maybe for the integrated action, both cases from Indonesia and Argentina addressed biodiversity and climate change nexus, particularly in terms of adapting to a changing climate. And such a point is that the economic vulnerability of the farmers is really a key issue at the local level. This should be addressed to implement this kind of integrated action. And about NBS, both has the elements of the NBS. And such a point is very important or interesting phrasing, like unoptimized NBS, which would mean that maybe this has potential, but should be further strengthened to kind of continued as a real NBS. And for the separate potential OECMs, I think this can be reflected on later. In Indonesian case, that site is located in the buffer from protected forest. And in Argentina, it's in the alpine landscape among the maybe in mountain high biodiversity areas. So these areas have the high potential for OECM maybe. And for the scape approach, this is also deeply discussed by Hemant already. In the Indonesian case, such a point suggests a very interesting point from their efforts in the ground by saying the intermediary role to connect different stakeholders at the ground level. And in Argentina, they suggested the need for participatory governance mechanisms so that the local interests can be represented in decision making, potentially in the national level. And the local initiatives for achieving the global goals, these are really clearly addressed by the answers from the two presenters now. So we still have 2 minutes to go. So maybe we can answer to the questions from the audience. So to the both presenters, there's a question, is there an account from 2 case studies on how the solutions tackle biodiversity loss? So maybe could you answer in short, Sacha and Veronica, in this turn? How your actions are directed?
Can you repeat again, Yasuo, the question?
The question?
Or is it the question in the Q&A?
Yeah. How the actions, your actions are addressed biodiversity loss in a direct way?
In a direct way, okay.
Yeah.
So Veronica, I'll go first if you don't mind. So the coffee agroforestry as a nature-based solution in our case study is actually the buffer for the protected forest area. And it's also the biodiversity corridor for wildlife. So sometimes the wildlife roams in the private land of the farmers. So in that sense, retaining or conserving those area is important because it acts as the buffer for the protected forest, but also provides some sanctuary for the wildlife to roaming a little bit farther than the protected forest area. So in that case, that will be my response. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for a very clear answer. How about the case in Argentina, Veronica?
Thank you. Well, regarding pastoral lands in the Puna region, since the natural vegetation is the base of the systems and most of the species are local and native, everything is nature-based solutions. Where our results and what part of this research group has been working for 30 years in the area, and the results show that it's important to develop and to improve the strategies, the local strategies, the ancestral strategies, instead of importing and taking practices and management strategies developed for other areas. And it is important to conserve the species, and most of the management strategies that we propose are related to conserve, especially the vegetation and the biodiversity associated. And even if those species, those animal and plant species, aren't used in the system, aren't the objective of the production, but they should be included since they provide stability and resilience of the system.
Yeah, thank you. That's very clear. The Andean pastoral system itself is a very important element of the biodiversity. So the time is running out now. So maybe we can respond to the additional question maybe in the issue brief, which we are going to publish after this session. So for the interest of time, we will move on to the closing by the Mr. Okuda, the Director General of the Nature Conservation Bureau of Ministry of the Environment of Japan. So, Mr. Okuda, the floor is yours for your final remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much for your introduction. I'm Okuda Naohisa. I'm privileged and very pleased to participate in this important events, as well as to have an opportunity to deliver these closing remarks. I'd like to begin by expressing my sincere gratitude to President Takeuchi and all the staff members of the best host organization, IGES, and also thank today's panelists and coordinators for useful information and very important discussion. I have received many significant inputs from all of the presentators. Due to the time constraints, I'm very sorry not to make comments on each presentations. However, today's presentations and discussion made me recognize again the importance of linking the activities of the Satoyama Initiative more closely, not only with the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, but also with the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. I couldn't agree more with your thoughts. I hope that all of you will work on global challenges together with UNUIAS, serving as the Secretariat of the International Partnership for the Satoyama Initiative, IPSI, and the IPSI members by using the function of social ecological production landscapes and seascapes. If any of your organizations have not yet taken part in the partnership, I welcome your participation as a member of this partnership. Based on the initiative's 10-year experiences, I hope we can develop those efforts further on the occasion of CBD COP15 and yield visible results. I believe the initiative can contribute to international development of circulating and ecological economy. That concept has been proposed by government of Japan, and it aims to improve environment, economy, and society in an integrated manner and to the achievement of SDGs. With regard to the post-2020 framework to be adopted at the part 2 of the COP15, a number of countries have expressed their supports for the target that aims to conserve at least 30% of global land and seas by 2030, so-called 30 by 30. Nature to be conserved under this target will become a foundation of nature-based solutions, or NBS, and also will contribute to climate change countermeasures as well as biodiversity conservation. I firmly believe that Satoyama Initiative can significantly contribute to this 30 by 30 target through setting up and managing other effective area-based conservation measures, or OECMs. I think those points are already mentioned in the Professor Takeuchi's opening speech, as well as the panel during panel discussions. In addition, in terms of climate change countermeasures, Japan announced last year a policy which aims for the realization of carbon neutral by 2050. The Satoyama Initiative promotes the sustainable use of local resources while conserving natural ecosystems that can absorb and store carbon dioxide. Accordingly, for the realization of carbon neutral world, the initiative could contribute not only to building a self-resilient and decentralized society, but also to our decarbonized society. Therefore, the Satoyama Initiative that shows great promise for multiple benefits on challenges of biodiversity. Climate change and sustainable development will become more important. For this reason, as our Minister Yamaguchi announced at the part 1 of the COP15 held last October, the government of Japan will provide international assistance through the second phase of the Japan Biodiversity Fund of $17 million in total, including the implementation of the project of Satoyama Initiative through UNDP. Japan will continue to make contributions to the 30 by 30 target and to the realization of the 2050 vision for biodiversity, living in harmony with nature through providing support for developing countries in revision of their national biodiversity strategies and action plans, among others. Thank you for your attention, and I wish all the participants very best for the sustainable future on the earth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director General Okuda, for encouraging closing remarks. So I'd like to thank you all for joining this session. I hope the discussion was both fruitful and insightful. ISAP 2021 is ongoing through the 3rd of December, which is tomorrow. And I hope to see you in other sessions or at next ISAP. Thank you.